Maayong Aldal sa Tanan. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Stephen Rood. I am a member of the board of social weather stations and a fellow in residence there. I have been in the Philippines since 1981. First 18 years, I was at the University of the Philippines in Baguio. The next 17 years, I was the Asia Foundation Country Representative, and I stepped down from that position in early 2017. While I was in that position, I was on the third-party monitoring team and international contact group in connection with the negotiations and then comprehensive agreement on the Bangsamoro with the MILF. Probability sample surveys is what I've been asked to talk about. And we do have some data from social weather stations that we've asked about ARM and about BARM, as you'll see towards the end of my presentation. But I'd like to begin with what, why, when for probability sample surveys. Now, I use that phrase to describe what we're talking about because it's not what many people call surveys, where basically they're asking people to answer questions, whether on the web or call in radio or whatever. The thing about probability sample survey is you use statistical probability methods to find the people that you're looking for, to look at the units that you're doing so that you can do some statistics on it and make generalizations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We're looking here basically for quantitative data. The fact of the matter is that we want to use statistics on these data. And so we construct a questionnaire in such a way that it can be entered into a computer and analyzed using anything from statistical packages to Excel to come up with averages and regressions and cross-tabulations and the whole gamut of statistical methods. Very often, these quantitative methods are used in conjunction with, along with, qualitative methods. So for instance, you could do focus group discussions to understand what people are generally talking about, then a quantitative survey to look at how frequent or which kinds of people are talking that way about a subject. And then afterwards, you could do focus group discussions again, where you present the quantitative data and get people's interpretations of what is going on. So you can move backwards and forwards from one to the other, but I'm focusing on the quantitative. You need to identify an agenda. So you need to know what you want to talk to people about. You need to construct a questionnaire, and the questionnaires are the script for the interview. The interviewers is supposed to stick with the questionnaire word for word. Of course, then that means they have to be trained. And then you need to do the field work and accurately select these probability people. You can't just go out there and ask whoever you happen to meet. Even if you go out into the field and go to a barangay and say, hi, we'd like to do a survey, you're likely to get the barangay captain and his friends and the people who live near the central barangay and so on, not really a statistical sample. This is meant to give an idea of what this is all about so that you, as public information officers, can understand if this is the kind of thing you want to do, or if you think that you will be constructing a questionnaire and handing it over to somebody else. Very often in your areas, there are academics and there are firms such as ourselves, Social Weather Station, who can be contracted to do this kind of work. So you can come up with your agenda from many different sources. For instance, if we're doing this about the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, the Bangsamoro Organic Act has a number of different issues in it that are important for understanding how people react to what is being done in the barn. Or the comprehensive agreement of the Bangsamoro has got a number of things that you can look into. The agency that you work for could indeed have its own agenda. Social Weather Stations has done lots of work for government agencies, Department of Energy, for instance, on the acceptability of nuclear power, or the DSWD about how well the 4Ps program is working. So the agency's needs could be taken into account in what your questionnaire should look like. And then there's issues, right? COVID. Clearly, one of the things that we at social weather stations, and presumably you in the BARM, are very much concerned about is COVID, its effects on people, and how they're reacting. And predictable events in the near future. Very often surveys are asking about upcoming elections. This is a controversial practice, but politicians are interested in the answer of what is likely to happen in upcoming elections. So in the questionnaire design, you need to start brainstorming what questions it is that you need to have to answer the agenda. Often the agenda is sort of general, and so when you get to the specific issues and the specific questions, you have to craft a question about it. You know, if you're interested, for instance, in the 4Ps, what about the 4Ps? Did it come regularly? Did it change your child's life? And so on. You can ask many different questions about it. Qualitative methods, such as the focus group discussions that I mentioned, could indeed be part of the way that you decide what your questions will look like. You have to pre-test questions. We in the survey field know that even if we think a question makes sense, if we ask an average individual, they might not think the question makes sense. It's too abstract or it requires specialized knowledge. It's important to pre-test the questionnaires to understand how an individual respondent will get to it. You need to translate it into various languages. In social weather stations, our main questionnaire is in Filipino. We then translate it into English because the vast majority of Filipinos can understand either Filipino or English. In order to make sure people are comfortable, we translate it into other languages, Ilocano, Cebuano, Ilonggo, and so on. And in particular, if we're working in Muslim Mindanao, we tend to translate it at least into Maranao, Maguindanao, and Tausug, to make sure that it is adequately understood when we go off into rural areas where people might not have access to Filipino or English. You got to reproduce the questions. I mean, part of the point about survey research is medyo mabusisi. You have to be very attentive to the details. So the questionnaire, in most of our questionnaires, is paper. We mimeograph it and we bundle it up and we ship it out into the field. Recently, we have done some computer-assisted interviewing where the questionnaire is on the interviewer's cell phone because we were doing cell phone surveys, but mostly we're using paper and pen. And then you have to train the interviews. You have to get them so that they understand what they're looking for and how to actually do the interview. So, sampling procedure is where we select a smaller number of people from a larger population. Now, when you're doing probability sampling, you're doing this by a sum probability method. And in doing probability samples, an interesting fact is that the accuracy of the sample depends only on the number of people or other entities like businesses or whatever in the sample, not how many are in the population. So 300 is the normal social weather stations survey for Metro Manila. 300 would be a normal social weather station survey for the Sulu Archipelago. There's lots more people in Metro Manila than there is in the Sulu Archipelago, but the survey is equally accurate. I've been teaching statistics and this sort of thing for 30 or 40 years now, and people always ask, what's a good size for the sample? And the answer is the bigger the better. So there is no real answer. The question is turned back. How much can you afford in time, in money, in survey interviewers, and the like? And that's the answer to what is your sample. The principle of sampling, everybody uses this sort of analogy in the survey work, and that is you don't need to eat a whole pot of soup to know how it tastes. All you need to do is stir it well and taste a little bit. You have to stir it well. The part that's in the bottom of the soup needs to be well stirred so that you get a good idea of the taste. And that's essentially what a probability method does. So the outline of our sampling procedure. Now, our sampling procedure is a little different for the National Capital Region than for the rest of the country. You're from the rest of the country, so I'll start with undertake sampling for the rest of Luzon, the Visayas, and Mindanao. And basically, what you do is you use a probability method to choose which provinces to go to. And the more populous provinces have a better chance than the least populous provinces. So Batanes is very rarely selected because there's so few people there. But Pangasinan is very often selected. But the point there is you're just representing the rest of Luzon. You're not representing Pangasinan, you're not representing Batanes. You're representing the rest of Luzon. And then within the provinces, you go through the cities and municipalities. Again, probability proportional to size, larger cities, larger municipalities are more often chosen. And then you choose the barangays, which we call spots. Okay. Then you go to the spot and you travel there and you take 5 people from there. And you get 5 people randomly by using a random start. So if you go to a particular barangay, you will be told whether to start with the barangay captain's house or the chapel or the mosque or the barangay health station or whatever, so that you don't know where you're starting. And then you systematically walk through the barangay in ways that we train people rigorously on until you get 5 respondents. Then when you get to the household, when you get to the house, you start asking the people, any adult in the house, you ask them to list everybody who lives there. And then in the field implementation, you select the household, you select the probability respondent from inside the household, and you read the questionnaire exactly. The accomplishment of the PR table, accomplishment of the probability respondent table, is how it works. And actually, it kind of steps through what happens. You go there with a blank sheet. You ask to list every member of that household from oldest to youngest. And then you draw a line down from the 8th one, in this case, the 8th household, because you're going through households, and this is household number 8, all the way down to the youngest eligible adult, 18 years and above. So there are 5 eligible adults there, and you circle there, and we're supposed to talk to person number 5. So you talk to Anali. You'll notice on that line, sometimes it says 1, and sometimes it says 2, and sometimes that is a table that is randomly generated to make sure that you get a random sample of people. At no point in this entire procedure are you supposed to do your own choosing. The procedure chooses for you. And that is a way that says that no bias enters into it. You're not more likely to choose a male. You're not more likely to choose a female. You're not more likely to choose young or old or whatever. You just do what the probability system says. Then you have to process the data. And basically, we get it in there, we clean the data, we stick it in the computer, and we generate what we call primary data tables, which are per question for different kinds of breakdowns. Where they're from, are they young, old, are they male or female, are they Christian, Muslim, etc. Missing from that slide is the step between primary data tables and data archiving. In fact, a report needs to be written, okay? And that's what people like me do. What I do is I help with the questionnaire, give some advice, and listen to the client, for instance, to try to figure out what it is they want. And then I write a report, because generally speaking, the output is just statistics, right? Tables and graphs and so on. And the average individual wants it in words. And that's what I do. And I give some interpretation and so on. The question of coding comes up often, and it partly drives the construction of the questionnaire. There are basically 2 kinds of codes. There are closed-ended codes where you know what the answer is going to be. Sex, generally speaking, we just do male and female. We know what age is or what education is, and so on and so forth. So we can list those codes in the questionnaire so that all the interviewer needs to do is circle the code that is the correct answer. The open-ended questions are where you don't really know what the answer is going to be. And in that process, the interviewer has to write down the answer verbatim. Whatever it is the respondent says, the interviewer writes it down in whichever language. Because you're not going to be translating that into English or Filipino in your head. You just write down whatever it is they say. In the office, then, they are then coded. They are grouped. Oh, all these kinds of different answers are talking about the economy. What about the economy? Well, sometimes it's jobs and sometimes it's inflation, et cetera. And this is an important point. Many people writing questionnaires tend to use lots of open-ended questions. And believe me, I was guilty of that. And I remember back in the late 80s, sitting in a room with thousands of pieces of paper trying to categorize them all. It was a nightmare. It is better to do work ahead to try to figure out what the answers are. For instance, if you don't really know what answers are to, are you willing to get COVID, do a focus group discussion and then use the answers that you hear from there as your closed-ended questions. In short, the social weather stations tries to discourage open-ended questions, not only by refusing to ask them if requested in its due word, but even if we agree, we charge more for an open-ended question than for a closed-ended question because it's more work. One of the things that happens in surveys is weighting the data. If you've got the same number of respondents for the Sulu Archipelago as you have for the Metro Manila area, if you want to combine them in some way, you have to weight them so that the people in Metro Manila, even though there's only 300 of them, weigh more than the 300 people from the Sulu Archipelago. Or, for instance, when we did the telephone survey, something on the order of 2/3 of all the people who were willing to talk to us, who answered their phone and stayed on the phone, were female. Now, if we're going to combine male and female, we have to weight it back down so that male and female is the same. So you can weight the data, but that also requires that you have some idea of what you're looking for in terms of overall results. The role of statistics and data analysis. Basically, there's two kinds of statistics. There are descriptive statistics and inferential statistics. Descriptive statistics are the things that we hear so much about in the media. The percent of people who are satisfied with President Duterte, are willing to take a COVID vaccine, have lost their jobs. That's a description of the data that you have. Now, sometimes the question is, well, it's 28% of females and 18% of males. Is that really different? Or is it just because of probability and random fluctuation? Is that just a random fluctuation? And that's where inferential statistics comes in. It is how much confidence you can put in the data, how you can generalize the data to larger populations. You'll notice if you read the press releases of the social weather stations, which are up on our website, you'll notice we always talk about the margin of error so that people have some idea of when we say this percent versus that percent, is that big or small compared to the margin of error? It's the best way to be transparent about it. So essentially, we at social weather stations, we put out press releases once, twice, even 3 times a week, saying what our data say. Here are the numbers. Here's the different kinds of numbers, whether educated or uneducated, Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, or Manila, and so on. And we let the media spin it the way they want. If they make false statements, we often do corrections or issue another press release. But, sila ang bahala sa anong sinabi nila tungkol sa aming results. Social weather stations is self-sustaining because it gets commissions from departments or politicians or foreign academics and so on. And commissioned items are confidential because, generally speaking, they want them to be, the clients want them to be, but only for a maximum of 3 years. We don't do anything that is permanently confidential. Thinking about it, of course, the 3 years comes from the electoral cycle. We don't make any data public from election surveys until after that term is ended. And it's available in public and Social Weather Station's public library, but you kind of got to go to Social Weather Stations to get it. And so we have not yet put it up online, but that's our goal, to make it freely available for many people to do more academic work. We do have some selected results from past work from Muslim Mindanao. I understand that you will have received the 2015 publication we did, which was about the Bangsamoro Organic Law and the Mamasapano Massacre and people's reaction to it. And the brief version of the story, of course, is that the average Filipino was okay with the Bangsamoro peace process until Mamasapano, after which they got very negative about it. We know this and so on. So you can see that chart 12 is from that publication. We asked the question of people in the BARM, at that time the ARM, and nearby areas, are you in favor? You approve of the Bangsamoro Basic Law? And if you look at those bars, you will see that Sulu and Isabela City are not in favor. And, for instance, Cotabato City is very much in favor. Well, if you look at the results from January 2019, that's exactly the right result. In other words, in 2015, we got results that predicted the way the plebiscite would go 4 years later. In fact, there is some public acknowledgement that we did do a pre-election survey for the plebiscite. A couple of the proponents released some of the results, but we're not yet at liberty to release it. But I will tell you, we were within 2% of the actual results. The average Moro knows what they think about the Bangsamoro Organic Law, about the MILF, about the peace process. It's been going on for years and years and years. Why shouldn't they? Now, the one thing that didn't come out the way we predicted was Lanao del Norte municipalities. The 6 municipalities of Lanao del Norte did in the plebiscite vote to join the BARM. But because the rules said that the province of Lanao del Norte as a whole had to agree, they couldn't join. So again, we predicted the vote, but we can't predict the result because it's a legal matter of whether or not the province was needed to be asked. In September of 2019, we asked special survey sample in the BARM as opposed to the rest of Mindanao. In other words, we added 300. Normally we have 1,200, 300 each in Metro Manila, the rest of Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. This time we had 1,500, 300 each in Metro Manila, the rest of Luzon, Visayas, BARM, and the rest of Mindanao. Because when we do our normal sample, Mindanao gets 300. And the population of BARM is only about 16% of the population of the entire island of Mindanao. So the people in BARM tend to get submerged in the broader Mindanao population. So we really wanted to have a special sample for Muslim Mindanao, BARM. We asked a couple of questions you'll see that are applicable only to BARM, but mostly we just asked the same questions we asked everybody else, including how satisfied are they with Duterte? And interestingly enough, you will see that 94% of people in the BARM are satisfied with Duterte, or were in September 2019. Which is more than Philippines as a whole, or more than any other region of the Philippines. It's interesting, but this is, you remember, just 6 months or so after the standing up of the BARM, and so people knew that the administration had supported the BARM, and so were therefore satisfied. Another question we ask frequently is self-rated poverty. Self-rated poverty is one of the key statistics of social weather stations. Founding President Mahatma Gandhi really is very important in the international quality of life survey community, and he cares about people's quality of life. And what he likes about doing self-rated poverty is two things. First, it comes from the viewpoint of the respondent themselves. It's not some government economist saying whether or not somebody is poor. It's the respondent themselves saying whether or not they're poor. Secondly, because it's done on a sample, it can be done much more frequently. And so therefore, we do it every quarter, whereas the poverty rate of the government only comes out once every 3 years. So for us, it's important to be able to track this so that you can see how things change. For instance, with respect to COVID. Now, the way we do it is very simple. All we ask is, where will you put yourself on this card? That's all we ask. And then they point, and we just record. Did they point poor? Did they point not poor? Or did they point to the line? And we do two cards, one flipped over so that there's no bias for above or below. So self-rated poverty in the Philippines and Mindanao, you see the results that we got in September 2019. Just focusing on the not poor, since they're the smallest group anyhow. In the total Philippines, 28% of the people say they are not poor. 72% then are either poor or on the line. In all of Mindanao, it's 18. Which is less. But if you look at the next line down where we separate non-BARM from BARM, you will see that non-BARM areas is 20, whereas BARM areas, only 6% say they are not poor. I mean, we kind of already know that BARM is one of the poorest regions in the country from many different statistics. But using this sample, we can track change in response to, for instance, the 4 Ps, or the health outreach of the BARM administration, or whatever. Is it worse for COVID? We haven't asked this in BARM itself after COVID. We've got it for Mindanao as a whole, and we've released the results for late 2020 already about that. And of course, the poverty rate did go up because of COVID, but we don't have a separate sample for BARM. We don't have a separate sample for BARM for the simple reason that it costs money. In September 2019, we used our own resources to do it, hoping to entice, to encourage other people to do it, to fund us or to do it themselves so that we get a separate sample for BARM. Now, one of the questions we asked in BARM only is, what are the good things that have been done by the government of BARM in your locality, Sa Lugar Ninyo? And you'll see on that slide, 58% say no good things yet. This is fairly soon. I mean, the BARM hadn't even received its money. So it's kind of understandable that not many people saw anything good. And then 15% don't know. So 73%, 74%, they just don't know. They don't cite anything. So peace and order, infrastructure, and livelihood assistance are the three that are top of line. And that's the sort of thing that people care about. The next one is the opposite. What are the bad things or shortcomings of the BARM government? So far, 68% say no, and 22% say don't know. So 90% of people have no answer. In general, people are a little less likely to say bad things in surveys. They like to talk about positive things. And so generally speaking, when we ask about bad things, we have a lower response rather than good things. But still, not much is going on. And, the 3% of respondents, we're talking 3% of 300 is 10 people. So we're talking about trivial amounts. But this would be interesting to ask again now that the BARM government has had a year or two to actually spend money to undertake actions to affect people's lives and see whether or not these answers change. Unfortunately, we can't afford it ourselves. We spent most of our money keeping our people employed through the COVID epidemic, and we're only now breaking even again in our service. So we're hoping that somebody will come through. Our website is there. You can see our results there. But for now, I will sign off and hope that you found this valuable. Daghang salamat sa tanan. Sukran.